Hello and welcome to Code Tutorials. Today we'll take a look at the Advanced Timeline, another one of the widgets from the Qi Addons for Elementor Premium Collection. As its name indicates, this widget will help us create timelines, but it goes beyond the regular listing of events. As you can see from this first example, you can include images and text, which are revealed when visitors start to interact with the element. The Advanced Timeline is both a great way to get your visitors to engage with your site and a very elegant way to present the path your business took to get to where it is today. We can see other examples of this widget's use here. In fact, this entire page is dedicated to the Advanced Timeline as a way of showcasing the different designs we can create with it. We can pick if the image will be under the timeline with the text under that, or if it will have the text next to the image as we first saw. Then we can choose the timeline style, set its colors, and so much more. Rather than just talk about it like this, let's dive in. Head over to the back end. I prepared this section in advance where I plan to add the widget. There's not much to it, let me show you. Click here to open the section editing options, and using the color option here, I just set the background color. That's it. With that taken care of, I can add the widget I want to the page. To do that, I'll click here to open the element search, and then I'll start typing Advanced Timeline to look for the right widget. There it is. Drag it over to the right. Okay, this is normal. We can't see anything right away because the widget is lacking content that would make it visible. For that, we need the options. I'm going to skip these two. They won't have much effect until I've added a few items or points to the timeline. So, click to add one. Okay, I'll start customizing it right away, starting with the timeline date. As you can see from the note below, the input should be in a month, day, year format. However, because of a setting I have currently, only the year will be shown in the timeline on the page. That's changeable, but more on that later. For now, let me set my date. There. Next, we can add an image. I'll use one from my media library. There it is. Insert media. And here. Please note these curved edges are part of my image. They weren't created by the Advanced Timeline widget. Alright, let's keep going. The next options are for setting the subtitle, title, and text. You can enter something to one or all of these. It's up to you. I'll use only the title and text fields. I want a bit of a description to go with each point on the timeline, hence the text. And you can see both it and the title here on the page. Now, I'm not using a subtitle, but I'll set something just to show you what it might look like. There. The subtitle is placed above the title. Okay, I'll clear this. Next, we have this rectangle on the page. It's not an error, it's an unfinished button. It doesn't have a target link or any button text, so the rectangle acts as a placeholder. For my link, I'll set a hash symbol. It will make the button look and act as if I'd set a proper URL. Then for the link or button text, I'll set some text that will appear within the button. Okay, here it is now. Alright, this completes my first point on the timeline. I'm going to create more now by adding new items. Since we just saw how that goes, I'll skip ahead with the video. And here we are. I've made 5 items in total and customized each one. You can see 5 points on the timeline. And even in the editor view, we can click through them to see everything that's in the timeline, all the text and images I added. Since I'm done with the items, we can take a look at the options above them. There's the minimal distance between dates. The default value is 60 pixels, but I'll set 190 instead. Now, what this option basically does is that it sets the minimal distance between the points on the timeline. But as you can see, the timeline will still keep a proportionally larger space when the dates are further apart. So the view is going to offer a sense of the time lapse, even with the change in distance. Other than that, we have the timeline displays option. It's set to only years, so the points on the timeline are marked only by years. But we can switch it to years and months, and then the timeline would look like this. But we can also set it to show years, months, and days, and that would get us this look. Finally, we can set it to show months and days, which in my case is going to be a bit repetitive. But if you have a fast-paced environment or want to show events that occurred in swift succession, then this might be just what you need. However, I want to show a longer span of time, so I'll go back to using the Elementor setting. Alright, that's that. Let's take a look at the button options now. They refer to this button here. But before we start, a quick notice. The button exists as a standalone widget in the Qi Addons collection, so we have a separate video detailing all its options. This is why I won't go into much depth here. I'll just run through the options showing you the different settings. So, there's the layout. It can be filled, which we see on the right, but it can also be outlined or textual. For my design, I'll go back to using filled. Then we can pick the button type. The default is standard, but we also have with inner border and icon boxed. This last one needs us to add an icon before it will look as it should. But I won't do that now as I don't plan to use this button type either. Rather, I'll go back to using the default setting. Okay, the next option is for enabling a button text underline. If we switch it to yes, we'll get this line under the button text. I don't plan to use this. And after that, we can set the button size. The settings are normal, which we see on the right, small, which shrinks the button a bit, large, which increases it a bit, and normal full width, which stretches the button as much as the content holder allows. For my design, I'll use normal. This brings us to the next section, button icon. This is where we can add an icon that would stand next to the button text. We can choose an icon from the icon library, which is quite extensive, or upload a custom SVG icon. And if we do that, we'll be able to select if the icon will be positioned to the right or the left of the button text. Following that, we have the Developer Tools section. It contains an option that you get with all of our widgets. If you switch it to yes, then it will display the widget in the form of a WordPress shortcode, the light gray text you see on the page, which you can easily copy for use elsewhere on your site. Alright, I'll switch this back. And under that, we have the Help section. It contains links to various helpful resources in case you need them. And that's all for the first Options tab, Content. Moving on to the Style tab now. To start with, we can adjust the content top offset. In other words, we can change the amount of space between the timeline and the image and text below it. When I start to move the slider, you can see how the gap widens. All this is pushed further below when we change the offset, simply because we have more space here. For the value, I'll set 55 pixels. Next, we can adjust the space between the image and the text. You can see how it changes when I move the slider, and the gap here is much smaller now. I'll set 0 for this as I plan to change the alignment for the text later. Okay, after this we have the option to pick the layout for the image and content. At the moment we have the image on the left, but we can put it on top so it's above the text. In that case, this is what my timeline would look like. And finally we can place the image on the right, and with that the image and text change places compared to the original setting. For my design, I'll go back to that original setting so the image will be on the left. Then we can pick the image alignment. The available settings are left, center, and right. However, my image is taking up all its available space, so changing the alignment won't have any noticeable difference. So, to show you this, I'll go back up and change the layout to image on top. Now, the image has room to move, and if I change its alignment to center, we'll get this look. Or we can change it to the right and get this look. I'll restore the default alignment setting as well as the default layout setting. After that, we have the option I was counting on when I removed any extra space between the text and the image, content alignment. The default setting is on the left, but we can move it to the right or set it in the center, which is what I want for my design. Here's my content now, aligned to the center. To go with that, we have the content padding option. You can increase the padding evenly so all sides would have the same values. You can see what approximately 50 pixels on all sides looks like. However, I prefer being able to pick for each side separately, so let me clear this. And here I'm going to use percentages instead of pixels. Usually I'd click on this little button to disconnect the fields, but since I have two sets of repeating values, I'll type in 13% in the right field, and then I'll disconnect them. The top and bottom paddings are going to be 0 for my design, there, and the right and left are going to stay at 13%. This has pushed the text content more neatly in the middle and makes for a much cleaner look. Okay, those were the general style settings. The next section is for the line and point style settings. So we'll be working on the timeline part of the element. And the first thing we can change is the line color. When I set a new color, you can see it affects only the line from the point we're looking at towards the end of the timeline. I want to set a pinkish shade for this, so I'll enter the hex code to get it. Okay, next we have the active line color. As you can see, it's there to change the color of the line from the start of the timeline to the point we're looking at. For this, I'll set another hex code because I have a specific shade of red in mind. There. After that, we have the line thickness option, which lets us make the line bolder or thinner. It's all down to preference. I'll set 2 pixels for mine. Then we have the line side offset, which lets us add space between the arrows and the line. When I move the slider to add an offset, you can see how the entire timeline shifts. Now we have extra space to the sides. I won't be using this for my design. Following that, we have the date color option. It's for changing the color of the dates in the timeline. We can see what the change might look like. I'm going to set the same hex code I used for the active line color here. Okay, there we go. After that, we have the date typography. This is a collection of settings that include options such as the font family for the title. I know the one I want, so I'll search for it. Okay, there it is. Next, we can change the date size. I'll put 28 pixels for mine. With the weight option, we can make the dates lighter or bolder. I'll set 400 normal for mine. There is one more thing I want to change here, and that's the line height. I'll use pixels for this and set 38 as the value. Now let's see what other options we have here. There's transform. It can turn the text to uppercase, but since we're dealing with numbers here, it's not going to be very effective. Following that, we can change the style from normal, which is the default, to italic or oblique. Then we can use the decoration option to add a line under, over, or through the dates. Under that, we have the line height, which I already changed. And with it, there are letter spacing and word spacing options, if we want to make any changes there. And those are all the options we get under typography. Let me close it. The next option we have is the point type. But before we look at that, let's go over the other point options we have here. They all affect the look of these points on the timeline. So we can modify their size. It's very straightforward. Change the value to get larger or smaller points. Then we have the point vertical position, which lets us change the position of the point in relation to the line. A positive value moves the point upwards and the negative pushes it downwards. And setting 0 makes them overlap perfectly. After that, we have the point color. It comes with this familiar color picker, so we can easily replace the color of the points with whatever we like. Let me clear this. And under the color, we have the point border radius. We do have a radius value by default. That's what makes the points on the timeline round. But if we set 0 for the radius, the points will get a square shape. Okay, I'll delete this. And in fact, I'll clear all the changes to the points that I made. And then we can look at the point type option. The default setting, which we see on the right, is standard, but we can replace it with icon. In that case, we'll get a field where we can upload an icon to serve as a point on the timeline. You can use something from the icon library or upload a custom SVG icon. I'll do the latter. I already have an icon that's styled to match my timeline colors. Insert media. Okay, there it is. Now I'm going to adjust its size slightly. 20 pixels, okay, and change its position to a negative value. But the slider won't reach, so I'll type it in by hand. It's going to be minus 35 pixels. Perfect. The timeline runs straight through the icon's middle. Let's see what other options we have here. There's the icon background color. If I set something, you can see the color appear in the icon's holder space. And the reason the icon and its background don't overlap is that I changed the icon size. However, if I proceed to change the background size as well, we can see how the background begins to match up with the icon. There's also the radius option here. it already has a value by default, which makes the background round, just like we saw with the timeline points radius. And if I set 0, then the background will become square. Of course, you can also set a slightly larger value and get a squarish background with rounded corners. I don't plan on using a background, so I'll clear the changes I just made to it. Give me a moment. Okay, there. With that, we wrapped up the line and point style section, and we can move on to the navigation style section. The options here will help us style these navigation arrows within the timeline. The first option here allows us to change their position. We can move them further up or down. I'll circle back to this later once I've adjusted the size. The next two options are for replacing the default navigation arrows with something from the icon library or a custom SVG. The first field is for arrow previous or the left arrow, and the second one is for arrow next or the right arrow. Under them, we have two more sets of style options. One's for adjusting the look of the navigation arrows when viewed normally, and others for adjusting the look on hover. So if we like, we can set the arrows to look different when we hover over them. Let's take a look at the options under normal first. Here we can change the navigation arrow's color. You can do that by hand with the slider or by typing in a specific hex code. I'm pretty close, but I'll set the hex code to be sure I have the same shade throughout. Also, we can set a background color for the navigation arrows here. Something like, let me see, this will do. I'm going to keep the background color so I can show you a few other things. Namely, if I change the navigation arrow size, this will also affect the size of the background, which we can see thanks to the color. However, if I change the navigation arrow holder width, then the arrow will remain unaffected while the background changes on its own, regardless of the value I may set for the holder width. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you and the reason I kept the background color. I'll reset this now and change the arrow size to 14 pixels to fit my planned design. Also, I'll reset the background color. Okay, done. I mentioned I'd adjust the arrow position after changing their size, so let's go back up. And I'll set 18 pixels to get the arrow and the timeline to match up. They line up perfectly now. And the thing we haven't covered yet are the settings under hover. In here we have the navigation arrow hover color. So if I set something different and hover over one of the arrows, we can see it change colors. I don't plan to use this. And the other thing we have is the navigation arrow background hover color. It's the same principle. If I set the color and hover over an arrow, we can see the new background color appear. I don't want any differences on hover, so I'll clear this as well. And that's it for navigation style options. The next section contains options for styling the subtitle text. However, I haven't entered any subtitle text, so these options won't do anything for me. But if you've entered any text with a subtitle, this is where you can change its color, its typography settings, or its bottom margin, the amount of space you'll have between the subtitle and title. Okay, let's move on to the section after that, title style. It's pretty similar to the subtitle style. We can change the color of the title text, and anything we set will show up on the page right away. I'll set the hex code for the same color I've used for the dates and the timeline. There. Then we have the title typography. Since we've already seen what options are bundled under typography, I'll make the changes I need and we'll carry on. And those changes will be to the font family. It's the same one I have for the dates. Then the font size, I'll set 50 pixels, and I'll reduce the weight slightly by picking 400 normal as the setting. That's all I wanted in the typography. After that, we have the title bottom margin option. We can use it to add more space between the title and the descriptive text that follows it. So this is the space we can adjust. But I'm happy with the default value, so I'll clear this. The section after this one is for styling the descriptive text. This here. Again, we have the option to change its color. Again, you can use the slider, but I'll set the hex code because I have this reddish tangerine shade I've been using throughout. There it is. Then we have another set of typography options. For my design, I only need to change the font size here. It'll be 20 pixels. Perfect. And the last option in this section is the text bottom margin. With it, we can adjust how much space we'll have between the text and the button underneath it. In my case, that's going to be 31 pixels. And this is the result. My text content is pretty much sorted and we can focus on the button now. For that, let's open the button style section. The first thing we have here is the typography settings. When I open them, we can see it's all the same as before. Just these options would apply to the button text. Still, I don't plan on making any changes here, so I'll simply close this. Then we have the switches for reversing normal and hover options. Starting with normal, we have the text color. You can freehand it to set any you like, but I'll add the hex code to get pure white. Okay, and I'll change the button background to go with that. If you like, you can set something to contrast with the text, but I'll use that tangerine shade so it all matches. Okay. After that, we have a few options that let us create a border. To do that, we need to pick a border color. I'll use this, for example. Then we need to give it a border width for it to appear. Now our button has a border. And if we like, we can adjust its radius. If we set a 0, only need the 1, but no harm done. If we set zeros, then the button will have sharp corners. Inversely, if we set a larger value here, the button would get rounded corners, so it would look more like an oval than a rectangle. I'll show you another possibility later, but for now, since I don't plan on using a border, I'll reset all these changes I just made. Give me a moment. There. Now let's look at the hover options. The first is text hover color, which lets us change the color of the button text when it's hovered over, like so. Still, this isn't something I need in this instance, so I'll clear the setting. Next, we have the background hover color. Same principle. If we set a different color, it will be visible on hover. For this, I'll set something just a touch lighter. One moment. And now when I hover, you can see the button seems to lighten. It's subtle, but it's a nice detail to have. And after that, we have the border hover color. If you're using a border, you can set a different color here and the change will be visible on hover. Last but not least, we have the reveal background. It lets us set what kind of transition we'll have between the normal and hover button background colors. By default, it's set to none, so there's no particular transition. However, we can add one by picking either horizontal, which looks like this, or vertical, which looks like this. Okay, I'll go back to using none. And those were the hover settings. If you recall, I promised you earlier I'd show you another look you can create with the border radius option. We'll do that now. I'm going to click on this button to disconnect the field so I can enter individual values. Then I'll set 20 pixels for the right side and 20 for the left. Now I have this asymmetrical button whose shape echoes that of the image on the left. So it's one more possibility for you to think of when considering the radius option. Now we have one more thing here, and that's the padding. With it, we can modify the space around the button text, and in doing so affect the button size. I'll change this slightly. First, by disconnecting the fields, and then by adding 13 pixels for the top value, 48 for the right, 13 for the bottom, and 48 for the left. Alright, great. With this, I've completed my advanced timeline element. The remaining sections of the options concern different button types, or buttons that have an underline added to them. Since that's not the kind of button I'm using in my design, these sections don't mean much to me. However, if you've opted for a different button type and need help styling it, you can check out our video tutorial on the Qi button widget, which I've linked both here and in the description below. So, since I've created the advanced timeline I wanted, let me hit update to save my work. Now let's see how it all turned out. The various points on the timeline are all here. The content is there, and my style is consistent throughout. When I click on the navigation arrow, it takes me further along the timeline so I can see to the very end. Everything is the way it should be. Before we sign off, I'd like to point out that this is just one possible design solution for the advanced timeline. You can see a few others on the page we started from. Here you'll see variations in style, the amount of content added, and the different layouts for displaying the text content and image. If you see something you like here, you now have all the knowledge you need to recreate that example. But you can just as easily treat this page as an ideas generator while you work to create something new and different. In either case, we hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions you'd like to leave us, please drop us a line in the comment section below. Also, make sure to subscribe and be the first to learn about any new tutorials on our channel. Thank you for watching.